My name is Clarence Darrow Casey. I was born in Rossland in 1908. Now, I would like to tell you just how I came to get my name. My dad, George B. Casey, he arrived in Rossland around the turn of the century. And about 1905, 1904, he married the daughter of Joe Hadfield, one of the old-time Rossland families. My mother's name was Clara Ellen Hadfield, and they were married in Rossland. My dad became, when my dad came to Rossland, he went to work in the mines, and later on he became interested in the Western Federation of Miners Union, and he was elected secretary of the Western Federation of Miners in 1905. Now, in about 1906, the Western Federation of Miners had a great deal of strife, especially in the state of Idaho, just across the line. And they did go on strike in the Coeur d'Alenes, and there was the governor of Colorado by the name of Governor Stuenberg, who arrested many of these miners and had them bullwhipped in the bullpens. And the miners, of course, became incensed with this type of business, and they were in pretty bad sorts with the Governor Stuenberg of the state of Idaho. One morning, as the governor left his residence, he opened the gate to go to work, and there was a bomb tied on his gate. And as he opened the gate, the pin was pulled from the bomb, and up went the governor of Idaho. And he died. The authorities then arrested 3 men implicated with the Western Federation of Miners from the main office. And this was Moyer, Pettibone, and Haywood. Moyer was the president of the Western Federation, Pettibone was the vice president, and Haywood was the secretary. Now, they were looking for one more man, a man by the name of Jack Simpkins. And I found out many years later that Jack Simpkins was hid in Rossland by my dad. And Jack Simpkins had $25,000 on his head. Jack Simpkins was smuggled out of Rossland later on, and he was never heard of again. He completely got away. Anyway, the trial of Moyer, Pettibone, and Haywood goes down in the history of North America, one of their most famous trials. The Western Federation of Miners Union made arrangements and hired a young lawyer at that time by the name of Clarence Darrow to defend Moyer, Pettibone, and Haywood. Now, Clarence Darrow went to work on this case. The trial came up around 1906, 1907, and Clarence Darrow gained his great reputation as a result of this trial. This trial lasted for many, many weeks. Dad, who was the secretary of the Rossland local of the Western Federation of Miners at this time, became quite friendly with Clarence Darrow and told Clarence Darrow that if he ever had a son, he was going to name him Clarence Darrow. Now, I came along in 1908, born in Rossland on the Nickel Plate Flat, and I, of course, acquired the name of Clarence Darrow, and that's my name today. Now, Dad, later on, about 1910, left Rossland and he rode horseback, he rode freights, and he got to the coast of British Columbia by one way or another. He bought a rowboat for $15 in Vancouver, and he rowed into Alaska, a matter of about 650 odd miles. He later on settled in Prince Rupert, and where in Prince Rupert he became one of the most famous people in Rupert, the same as he did in Rossland. And he was a member of the Rupert City Council there for many years. Now, we left Rossland, my mother and there was 4 of us born at this time, and we were all born in Rossland. We left Rossland in 1912, 2 years after my dad. Of course, we went to Rossland, or to Prince Rupert from Rossland by train and by steamboat, not by rowboat like my dad did. My dad came back here in about 1940. No, it was later than that. He came back here about 1950. And at this time, Lance Whitaker was the editor of the Rossland Miner. Lance Whitaker was a Prince Rupert boy as well, and he knew my dad very well, and he wrote quite a nice, lengthy write-up in the Rossland Miner about my dad and his activities of the early days in Rossland. Now, later on, I was in Prince Rupert, and in 1935. And I told my dad that I was going to apply for a job with the Consolidated Mining and Smelting Company. And he told me that not to waste my time because he wasn't in good favor with the Consolidated at this time. And I could not believe that anything that happened between my dad and the Consolidated should reflect on me, and I wouldn't accept this as an answer. I did apply to the Consolidated, and the Consolidated hired me without, shall we say, hired me immediately. And I came down here in 1935, back to my old hometown, and started to work for the Consolidated, and I have been working for them ever since, for the Consolidated and the municipality of Tadnak. My dad did some other things while he was in Rossland, way back, and he ran for a member of the legislature against such great men as Lorne Campbell. I cannot tell you at this time just who was elected, but I do know that Lorne Campbell and my dad were very great friends later on, although they were friendly enemies at the start. But later on they became very, very good friends. And there were all kinds of other people there, like Mr. Nimsick and the Feeneys and the Smiths. Oh, there's quite a number of others. And the Crows, Warren Crow was an old friend of Dad's. Jack McKinnon was an old friend of Dad's. And they were bosom pals, actually, Jack McKinnon and my dad. Who was this other person that lives just on the way out of Rossland, just past the old Rossland Union Hall? Roy Stevens. Roy Stevens is a great friend of my dad's. Now, I was born in the Nickel Plate Flat in 1935 and 1908, but my brother George was born in the Miners' Union Hall in 1910. He was born in the Miners' Union Hall, right there in the, we had a little apartment in the bottom floor of the Miners' Union Hall, and my brother George was born there then. So, you see, we have quite a heritage in Rossland. And that's about the end of the story that I would like to tell you, Jack.
Well, there is one other thing now. You gave me this little carving. Would you like to tell us
Oh,
how
yes.
that carving got in your hand and who did it and so forth? There must be something attached to that we would be interested in.
Not very likely. But this carving, this is a wood carving. This is one of the this is type of thing is becoming a lost art. You don't see it today the way that we used to in the old days. It used to be quite common to walk down the street and see a fellow. He could be an old fellow, it could be a young fellow, sitting outside of a store, chewing a rag with other fellows and whittling away. He'd have carvings on the ground, shavings on the sidewalk, and they'd be whittling. This was part of the pastime in the old days. It was quite common sight to see. In Prince Rupert, we had a very great friend by the name of Morse, A.O. Morse, M-O-R-S-E. Now, this Morse was one of those type of whittlers. He was a Scandinavian, I think Norwegian. And he used to do these carvings. My dad was always interested in mining. Matter of fact, he spent half of his life after he left Rossland prospecting in the North Country. He used to disappear for months at a time when I was a young boy. He used to disappear for months. We'd never see him. He'd turn up again. A.O. Morse decided he wanted to carve my dad as a hard rock miner, which he was. So he went to work and whittled this carving out all by hand, without any plan, without anything, just the way that he saw my dad drilling on his various claims, and presented this carving to my dad. Oh, way back in Prince Rupert, many years ago. And this was presented to my dad. And my dad, when he passed away, he left this carving to me. And I kept this carving for quite a number of years. But I thought that the rightful place for this carving should be in the Rossland Museum, because this is part of the history of Rossland. These are the people that made Rossland what it is today. Men like my dad and Jack McKinnon and Beanies and all of these people. These were the men that made Rossland. Warren Crow should not be forgotten either. They were great people. Now, this carving was made by A.O. Morse and presented to my dad, and now I am presenting it to the Rossland Museum. And I do hope that it will be properly taken care of and set up in the proper manner, and who it is, because this is exactly my dad, even to every facial feature that is whittled in this carving. So that's the history of this carving.
That's good.
You know, back in the early days, the unions weren't as popular as they are today. The Western Federation of Miners was what is today is part of the Mine Mill and Smelter Workers Union. This was a forerunner of this. It later on became the OBU, and it became the IWW, and then the Mine Mill and Smelter Workers Union, but it all originated from the Western Federation of Miners. They weren't as popular then as they are today as unions. Unions today are accepted, but it was by the work of these type of people that they did become accepted today. When I was a boy, my dad used to give me these papers, the Western Federation of Miners papers. I had 30-odd papers to deliver to 30-odd people in the town of Prince Rupert, which is a long way away from the town of Rossland. But I used to have to take these papers, and I would take them to these certain houses, and I would have to look up and down the street before I could approach the house. And I would look up and down the street to see that no one was coming before I could approach the house. Then when I see no one was coming, why, I would walk up to the house and conceal this paper in a certain place. I did this as a boy. I didn't realize what the implications were, except my dad told me what to do and how to do it, and to be very careful how I should deliver these papers. And these are some of the things that went on. Even as a boy, my dad used to take me to all his meetings, to the Western Federation of Miners meetings, the IWW meetings, and the OBU meetings. I used to go with him all the time, and then later on I used to go to the council meetings with him. He used to take me everywhere he went. When he was in town, when he wasn't out prospecting, or when he wasn't out of town on union business or some other type of business. But he used to take me with him all the time, and boy, I really enjoyed it. Even as a boy, I enjoyed it. And we used to talk at our dinner table, and we'd always talk about the current events that were going on, and this is maybe one reason why I'm so interested in world events that are happening today, just by the fact that this was part of my heritage. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's it, Jack.
IWW, what was that?
Independent World Workers.
Independent Woodworkers.
World Workers.
World Workers.
Oh, yes.
Independent World Workers.
Mm-hmm.
And OBU was one big union.
One big union.
I wanted to get that straight.
Yes. Independent World Workers, and then
how did they try to
and then the other side, they termed these people, I won't work. They turned the title around, and they dubbed them as I won't work. But their actual name was the Independent World Workers.
Well, were they a development of the miners' union, or were
Oh, possibly an offspring. Possibly an offspring. I don't think it ever materialized too greatly, but it was in the organizational stage. I don't think they ever got very far. I'm sure they didn't. The OBU got further than what they did than the IWWs.
the OBU? That was an effort to get one
One big union. This is what they call them. Yeah.
Now, in going through some of the old union papers that we had at our disposal at one time or another, there seems to be a lot of accusation of communism. Was this hurled at your father? Or was it
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yes. He was, but it wasn't communism in those days. It was called socialism. It was called socialism. I went to Rossland back in 1935, and I was with my uncle, Red Hadfield from Rossland. We walked down the street, and Red took great delight in introducing me to people, telling them who I was. So we walked up to this certain gentleman, and the Red said to this fellow, "Do you remember George B. Casey? Way back in the early days in Rossland." "Oh, George Casey, yes, I remember George Casey, the socialist." "Oh, yes, I remember George Casey." Sure. But this was dubbed socialism in those days. But my dad never ran socialistic. He never voted socialistic. He always voted liberal. He wouldn't vote CCF. He thought CCF were ahead of their time. He was a liberal. And he always voted this way. And he always supported the liberal candidates, much to the disgust of the CCF party in those days. Much to the disgust of the socialistic parties. He voted liberal all the time. When he ran in Rossland for the legislature against Lawrence Campbell, why, he ran independent. Absolutely. So some of his thoughts, definitely, I imagine, were along the socialistic line, but he certainly never practiced He never practiced socialism, never did. He couldn't believe that the country could be run in such a manner as which they advocated.
Well, this is interesting. I'm glad you mentioned it because people do tend to group all the early union workers as, you say, socialists.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Or agitators.
Yes, yes.
This is not fair.
Yes, oh, well, boy, my dad did have an awful time making a living because he sincerely and strongly believed in unions. He sincerely and strongly believed in unions. Unions are a good thing today, but same as anything else. We have derived a great deal of benefit from all these unions through the efforts of people like my dad and many others. Actually, Jack Buchanan was one of the early favorites in Rossland as well. But these people did pave the ground for the present day, benefits that we have in as a result of unionism and as a result of the great democracy in which we live.
Well, I don't suppose there's any doubt that there would be certain pressure on people like your father from the Socialist Party to infiltrate or take over.
Yes.
The reason I say this is I remember seeing telegrams and so forth. This
Yes.
is James Stanton.
Yes.
Where they're signed by comrades so-and-so.
Oh, yes.
I would think there would be an effort on these people to
Yes.
control.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. They used to put the pressure, they put the pressure on people like my dad. But my dad was a strong person. He was a strong-willed man. He would never, any ideas he ever had were his own. Any ideas that he ever materialized were his own. Anything he ever did, he did because he wanted to do it. He didn't do it because somebody dictated him to do it. He didn't do this. And they used to get so angry with him because he would not support the other parties in elections. They used to get so mad at him, and yet, in the next day, he would be back at his union business. But he was definitely voted Liberal. I was looking through some stuff here the other day, and I ran across one of his prepared, or a bunch of sheets of paper that he was preparing a talk in Prince Rupert when he was running for an alderman. Oh, and this would be back in 1930-odd. Back in 1930-odd, and I was reading it, and he was saying the same thing then about the CCF. He said that the country could not be run by a socialistic government like the CCF. That he did not believe in industry being taken over by any government because they could not be run effectively this way.
Well, I'm glad you brought all that up. This shows
Yeah.
that he was a strong individual. This is what we want to bring up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We got an hour's tape on there if you want to keep going.
No, that's about the end of it. But my dad did not believe in nationalization of industry. He could not understand that because he always used to take the examples of the CNR versus the CPR in the Dominion of Canada, and of course the CNR was the railroad that ran into Prince Rupert, and boy, it was in an awful mess, and it always was in an awful mess. As a matter of fact, I worked for the CNR for 2 years. It was in an awful mess because it was run by the government. Whereas the CPR was absolutely run by private capital. And there was as much difference in day and night in those days about the effectiveness of the two railroads. One run by government, the other run by private industry. So he could never believe that nationalization of industry could ever become effective. That we were, that the CCF had the cart before the horse, and he couldn't believe that they could run any effectiveness this way. Yep, I thought I should mention this.
Yes.
So that's about, those are most of my recollections, Jack, and what part of them you would like to use, why, that's fine.
And anything that's on this tape, you don't mind?
No, you can use any part of it. As far as I know, there are only 4 Darrows left in this world. And my name is spelled D-A-R-R-O-W, Darrow. There are many other Darrows, but they are D-A-R-R-E-L-L and D-A-R-Y-Ls and everything else. But there's only 4 D-A-R-R-O-W. And this is my grandson, who was called after me, myself. There is a boy, he's a man now, he's a member of the Prince Rupert City Council, actually, and his name is Darrow. He was called after me. His name is Darrow Gomez. And he named his son after him, and his name is Darrow Gomez. I received a letter many years ago from Clarence Darrow, the lawyer, in Chicago. And Clarence Darrow did learn that I was called after him, and he wrote me this letter and told me that I would be one of the only known people when he passed away, because I do not think that he had any sons. If he did, I did not know of any. So, as far as I know, there are only 4 Darrows left in this world, and I've never found anyone else ever spelled their name the same as I, except us 4. Mm-hmm. You will hear Darrow, but they are all spelled differently. But there are only 4 D-A-R-R-O-Ws.